Hello, welcome to VirtualManc YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the Azure Compute Gallery. We're going to talk about how you can use the Azure Compute Gallery to manage your images for Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. I see a lot of customers not using the Azure Compute Gallery, and I've never understood why. So what I'm going to do today is walk you through some of the reasons why you should be using the Azure Compute Gallery, okay? And then what we're going to do, we're actually going to go and deploy an Azure Compute Gallery, and then we'll deploy an image to the Azure Compute Gallery as well. We're going to do today's video using native Azure Compute Gallery, and then later in the week I'm going to do one using Nerdio as well. You can see the differences between the two and just show you how much easier it is to manage it by Nerdio. But for today's video, we're going to concentrate on the native Azure Compute Gallery. Okay, so let's get into it. And this is the type of content that you like. Please check out more of my content. If you just subscribe to my channel, I really appreciate it. Search for VirtualManc on YouTube and you'll be able to see all the different videos that we release every week around Windows 365, Azure Virtual Desktop, Nerdio, Intune, and much more. So yeah, if you want to see more of this stuff, please press subscribe. I'd really appreciate the support. Thank you. Alright, so I'm just going to talk about some reasons why I think you should use the Azure Compute Gallery. We're going to do top 5 reasons why you should be using the Azure Compute Gallery. So the main reason is centralized image management. It has that single source of golden truth for all your images. Rather than having to have your images spread upon different resource groups or subscriptions, we can have all the images in one central place. Okay, that's really important because it means we can now do centralized management, right? So if you want one source to go to for your images, that should be the Azure Compute Gallery. But the second reason why we should be using Azure Compute Gallery is basically we can do image versioning, right? So I can take a base image version called 0.0, and then we can create like minor or major revisions to. So we can go to 1.0.1 or we can go to version 1.1, but it gives us the version control. Well, why is that important? It's important because if there's an issue, it means I can roll back. So I can just roll back to a previous version, rather than if you weren't using Azure Compute Gallery, you'd have to delete a VM or restore it. But now we can just go into the Azure Compute Gallery and select which version we want to be the active version, or we can go into Azure Virtual Desktop and select which version we want to create or redeploy the host pools from. It gives you much more control over versioning. So you can also add that into your release schedule or DevOps pipelines. The next one is something I think is probably the most important. Using Azure Compute Gallery, we can replicate our images into multiple regions. Why is this important? For disaster recovery. If I've got all my virtual machines in UK West, I can replicate my Azure Compute Gallery into UK South or North Europe or US or Asia or anywhere. And what that then means is I can create session hosts from those images in that region, which means if there's a disaster recovery scenario, as in UK South goes down or UK West goes down or North America goes down, it doesn't matter because I can just go and deploy a load of session hosts into the other regions and then allow my users to continue to work, right? So for me, the multi-region DR capability is probably the main reason why I get customers that basically deploy the Azure Compute Gallery and use it, because if UK South goes down, I can just flick over to UK West. So you've got DR built in right there. The next one is automation and pipelines. Whatever automation tool I'm using, they all plug into the Azure Compute Gallery, and we can use APIs, we can use PowerShell to access the Azure Compute Gallery. Doesn't matter what automation tool I'm using, whether that be Azure DevOps, whether that be Nerdio, whether you just do native view in the Azure portal or PowerShell commands. It means I can then reference the Azure Compute Gallery to deploy those session hosts. Okay, so just gives us an extra level of automation, and obviously we mentioned about the control, and I'll go into that more when we do the video about Nerdio a bit later in the week. But it just gives us more control how we're using those images within our DevOps pipeline. So we can go to major, minor release, or we can select, maybe we've got a test host pool or something and we want to select a very specific version for that test host pool. That enables us to do that by using automation methods as well. It actually gives us the ability to manage Windows 365 as well. So using the Azure Compute Gallery is not just for Azure Virtual Desktop, it's also for Windows 365. So if you want to publish the same image to Windows 365 as you're using for your Azure Virtual Desktop environment, you can do, right? So also any other service as well, so you can do this for servers and stuff. So yeah, but if you are managing Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop in your environment, then you definitely should be looking at Azure Compute Gallery, because it enables us to push those same images to both, and therefore we're not having to manage two separate images, and we can just manage one. Now obviously This would only be applicable if you're using a single instance, because obviously with Windows 365 we want to use Windows 365 Enterprise rather than multi-session, right? But if you are using single session desktops and you're managing those images, you can also manage those for Windows 365 as well. Okay, all right, so those are the 5 main things which the reason why I tell customers to use the Azure Compute Gallery for. So that's enough of the theory. Let's now go and actually create the Azure Compute, and then later on we'll push out to some session hosts using the image as well, and we'll see what that looks like. All right, see you on the other side. All right, so that's enough of the theory. Let's now actually go and create a Azure Compute Gallery. Okay, so we're going to head into the Azure portal, and then from there we're going to create an Azure Compute Gallery. We're going to create a master VM. We're going to prep it, and then we're going to publish that image to the Azure Compute Gallery that we created. All right, so let's get cracking. All right, over here in the Azure portal, you can see here is one that's just doing some testing with, and we'll create another one just to show you what that process looks like. All right, we're going to create the resource group. We're going to put this into images, and then we're going to call this YouTube demo. Obviously, if you have your own naming conventions within your company, I recommend doing that. It's completely up to you what you want to call it. Description: this is an Azure Compute Gallery for my AVD and Windows 365 images. Okay, so the next sharing method, we're just going to use RBAC, but Microsoft give you the ability to share it to a public gallery. If you're a software vendor and want to include a pre-installed version of your software to everyone to use, you can do that. We can also see this one in preview, which is interesting. That's not something I've seen before, so I presume this is going to give you the ability to share your images with other tenants, which is quite a cool idea. So yeah, we won't go into that in detail today. We'll just go into here. So we can see here as well, it's actually telling me my subscription is not registered with direct share galleries. If I wanted to share my gallery with other people, then I need to register that as well, but we don't need to do that because we're just doing it with our single tenant. Okay, we're not going to do tags, but in a production environment, definitely recommend you add some tags. Next review and create, all validations passed. So we're going to create that Azure Compute Gallery. All right, that's now there. We'll just give that a second, make sure that it's created. Deployment succeeded. We now have our Azure Compute Gallery. The next thing we need to do, obviously, go and create some VMs. So what we'll do now is we'll go and create a image VM, and then we'll sysprep that VM, and then we're going to publish that into our Azure Compute Gallery. Okay, so we're in the Azure portal. We're now going to go and create our master image VM. So I'm just going to create a virtual machine. We're going to set resource group as images, because that's where I want everything to be held, so I can manage that locally. Virtual machine name, so call this master image. We're going to do that in UK South. Availability zone, we'll leave that security type. This will be trusted launch. You can also enable secure boot and VTPM as well, or integrity monitoring, but we don't need to worry too much again about that from an image level. We're going to create a default ADS v6 as well, and if you wanted to enable hibernation mode on your images, you can select that as well. So administrator account, so we're going to call this VM admin. Password, I'm going to select none, because we're actually going to select Bastion to connect to it. The next we're going to disks. Here we can switch to standard SSD if we want to save a bit of money, but again, it doesn't matter because this is just going to be our master VM, which is only going to need for the creation of the images. So we're going to select OS disk type, so we're going to leave that as standard 127 gig. Now, if you did want to create a bigger image, now is where you need to do it. So if your session host, for example, need a 256 gig or a 512 disk OS disk because they've got a large application or something, you need to do the image at the same one, right? Otherwise, when you create the VM, you just have to extend it. But if you select it when you create the image, it means that we can create VMs with the same disk size. Okay, we're going to select delete with VM for that. I'm just going to leave those as default. So we're just going to select the existing VNet that we've got. We don't need a public IP address. Like I say, we're going to use Bastion for that. Select inbound ports, delete NIC when VM is deleted. Yes, please. Enable accelerated networking, and we don't need to do any load balancing either. Next, management, we don't need to do anything here. You can enable auto shutdown just in case you leave that VM running or something. So we can just leave those at default. Next, monitoring, we don't want any boot diagnostics. Production routers I normally enable this because if there's an issue with the VM, it enables me to have a look at that's what's happening on the screen. But for the sake of speed, just to get things done, I'm going to select disable here. We don't need any extensions or applications. If you wanted to deploy applications, you can select that here via extensions. So we're not going to enable all of this. This is just going to be default stuff. Next tags. Again, recommended that you do add tags to your VMs. So if you need to add some tags, add them in there. Next, review and create, and then make sure that we're all good. Yep, validation task passed. So that's going to go and create that VM running Windows 11 24H2 with M365 apps. Okay, we're going to select a default ESV6 and then deploy all those details. Now we're going to go and click create. So that's going to go away, create that VM. So I'll be back shortly when that VM is created, and then we can run sysprep on that, and then we'll create an image version from that, publish that to the Azure, and then we'll deploy some session hosts from that, and you can see how all that works. All right, back shortly. Our VM has been created, so we can connect to that via Bastion. Okay, so we select English UK, authentication type using VM password. I'm going to put my password in, so VM admin, and then the password which I configured, and then we're going to click connect. So I'm actually using the free tier, so it doesn't cost anything extra. This is quite cool. So we're going to log on to the VM, and then once we're logged on, we're going to run sysprep. At this stage, you install all your applications and stuff. This is why it's important to use code or something like Nerdio to try and create your images. Once we basically run sysprep, we can't use it again. There are ways around this. I won't go into detail today, but you can take snapshots and create clones of VMs and stuff like that. But we won't focus on that today. But what I will do later in the week, I'll create another video to show you how to do this by Nerdio. Obviously, this is a very manual effort. If we want to automate this solution, that's a video which will be coming soon. Okay, so we're now going to go and sysprep the VM. So if you needed to basically install any applications that you need to have on your session host, now is the time to do it. We won't go into that in detail in today's video, but you can push it out via SCCM or automation. Now it's time to do that. Once you've done that, we'll go over to Windows, System 32, go here, System 32, and then we go to sysprep. Okay, and then we go to launch sysprep here. We need to select Generalize to have a session host that's published to Azure Compute Gallery. It needs to be in the Generalized state. Enter out of the box experience, and then we're going to select shutdown. Okay, click OK for that, and that's basically going to run the sysprep and then shut that VM down, and then we'll be able to capture that VM and publish it to Azure Compute Gallery. All right, so back shortly. Okay, so as you can see, that's saying session close, which basically means that VM is shut down. So we just head over to our resource group. We should be able to see that is in a shutdown state. Not quite yet, but it will be in a second. There you go. So status stopped. That image is now sysprepped, which means it's not really usable. Now we're going to publish that VM to our Azure Compute Gallery that we created. What we need to do now is capture and then capture image. Okay, so we're going to select that. We're going to set the resource group as images where the source VM is. Share image to the Azure Compute Gallery. We're going to select yes. Share it to the gallery as a VM image version. You can also add it to delete as well if you want to. We'll leave that checked off for now. Target Azure Compute Gallery, the one we just created. You can see there it's saying generalized VM. That's the one we need. Capture an image will take a virtual machine unusable. We know that. Target definition. So no VM image definition in gallery. So VM image name, we're going to call this master image. OS type Windows, Gen 2, trusted launch, x64, high performance storage with NVMe if we need it. And we're not going to select hibernation supported at this stage. The Windows Virtual Desktop with Office 365 in there as well. You can also put some stuff in here if you want to, but we don't need to at this stage. Click OK, and that's going to create the image definition. And then we're going to select a version number to 1.0. Okay. We don't need to select any of these, so we're going to leave exclude from latest off. We'll go through that next week when I do the Nerdio stuff. I'll explain the use case around that. Then we're going to do end of life date. We don't need to do anything there. So this is where the replication stuff comes into play, right? By default, we've got a default storage SKU of zone redundant. So definitely recommend that, because it means that if one of the zone goes down, for example, if that VM is held within like zone 1 within UK South, then we're unable to build session hosts. So definitely do zone redundant. And you can also select standard HDD or premium SSD as well. Okay, so we'll select zone redundant, and you can see there we've got replicas where we need to replicate the images too. So For example, if we're in the UK, we basically want to put that over to UK South, for example. So if UK South goes down, I can still do VMs within UK West. Let me just go down here and select Europe and then UK West. Okay, so you can see there, that's basically going to copy that VM over from UK to UK West, so not the VM name image. UK South to UK West, and then we're going to select there, add some tags if you need to do that from there as well. So yeah, replication, difficult replication 1, replication from UK South to UK West, image version number is 0.0, and our source machine is the master image. Okay, so now we're going to go and click create. Okay, so that's now going to go over and basically copy that VM over. So keep on saying VM, copy the image into the Azure Compute Gallery, and then it should be available to use to create session hosts from. Okay, so that's going to take a while, so I'll be back when that's done. Okay, so that deployment is now complete. So what we'll do now, we go to resource, we can see that now in the Azure Compute Gallery. So if we go down to, let's get over here. So if we go to the Azure Compute Gallery, we go to YouTube demo, we can see there we've got our image definition within here, and you can see there that's 0.0, which is the latest version. Now, the good thing about, as I mentioned, the Azure Compute Gallery is that if we wanted to create a new version, we could just go to 0.1, for example, or 1.1, and that enables us to select which version that we want to use when we create session hosts. Right? How would we use that to create VM? I'm not going to go through and show you the end-to-end process, because the whole idea of this video today is just to show you the Azure Compute Gallery stuff. If I go to Azure Virtual Desktop, create a host pool, select test, for example, group, select pool type, set pools, create session host configuration, no, maximum limit 5, next to session host. This is where the Azure Compute Gallery comes into play. Go to add virtual machines, select test, select an image, right? So if I go into here and select an image, so that's just giving me the default marketplace images, right? But if we click on show all images, go to shared images, we can see our Azure Compute Gallery images. This is the one that we just created, so then select that, right? Because I've not published this East US, we flick that over to UK South, for example, we can see that then goes away. That's essentially how you'd select the image when you're creating session hosts. Okay. All right, so yeah, that's how we create the Azure Compute Gallery. That's how we publish images to the Azure Compute Gallery, and that's how we deploy session hosts from the Azure Compute Gallery. As I mentioned, you should definitely look into doing this if you're using Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365, because it enables us to do version control, it enables us to do multi-region replication, so it's a much better way to manage the images in your environment. All right, yeah, that's it. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat window, and as I mentioned, what we're probably going to do in the next video, we're going to show you how to do this via Nerdio, because and you can see here there's a lot of manual steps and effort that we had to do, so I'll show you how to automate all that stuff via Nerdio as well to make it a much easier way to do this, and then we'll add some automation in there to delete, recreate and update and all that good stuff. Alright, that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please click the subscribe button, and I'll be back next week for more. Goodbye.